A werewolf shifter romance for you. Prologue. The air that night didn't just feel cold. It felt like a betrayal. I was 6 months old. I don't remember the warmth of a nursery or the lullabies of a mother. My earliest memory is the smell of wet pine, the metallic tang of unsheathed silver, and the sight of the moon reflecting off the frost on my father's fur. We were at the Bloodstone border, a jagged cliffside where the civilization of the Great Packs ended and the lawless chaos of the Deadlands began. My father, Alpha Silas, stood like a statue of golden granite. He didn't hold me. I was tucked into a coarse wicker basket at his feet, shivering against the biting wind that whipped through my thin swaddling clothes. "Is the payment ready?" Silas's voice was a low, vibrating growl that seemed to rattle the very earth. Across the borderline stood a man who smelled of wood smoke, old blood, and desperation. He was a rogue, a scavenger king named Bram. He didn't have the polished armor of a sentinel or the regal posture of an alpha. He was scarred, ragged, and dangerous. Bram kicked a heavy leather pouch across the frozen dirt. It landed with the heavy, unmistakable clink of high-purity silver coins. 20,000 silver marks, Bram rasped, his eyes darting to the basket. "More than enough to fund your war against the Northern Alliance, Alpha. But I still don't understand. Why sell a daughter of the Crescent lineage? She's your blood." Silas didn't even look down at me. To him, I wasn't a child, I was a failed investment. "A daughter is a liability," Silas spat, the words hitting me like stones. The prophecy spoke of a son who would lead the Bloodstone to total dominion. My Luna gave me this. A female, a mouth to feed, a bargaining chip to be traded away for someone else's bed. I have no use for a weak heir. If I keep her, the pack will see me as cursed. If I sell her, I buy my victory. From the shadows of the tree line, I heard a strangled, broken sob. My mother, the Luna, was being held back by 2 of Silas's strongest guards. Her eyes were red, her spirit shattered. She had begged for my life, but in the Bloodstone pack, the Alpha's word was the only law. "Silas, please!" she screamed, her voice breaking over the howl of the wind. "She's your firstborn! You're casting her to the wolves!" "She is being cast to the rogues," Silas corrected, his voice devoid of a single drop of mercy. "Which is exactly where a defect belongs. Take her, Bram. And if she ever crosses back over that river, kill her. I won't have the Bloodstone lineage tainted by a ghost." Bram reached down. His hands were calloused and stained with the grease of 100 kills. He picked up my basket, peering down at me. I remember my eyes meeting his. I didn't cry. Even then, something in my blood, something Silas had misjudged as weakness, turned as cold as the ice on the river. "She's got fire in her eyes, Alpha," Bram muttered, a grim smile touching his lips. "You might regret this trade." "Silver doesn't have a gender, and it doesn't have a heartbeat," Silas said, turning his back on me. "It's the only thing I need. Move out." As the Bloodstone warriors marched away, their torches fading into the distance, I was carried across the border. My mother's screams faded until there was nothing left but the sound of the rushing water and the heavy thud of a rogue's boots. I was no longer a princess of the Bloodstone. I was a discarded daughter, a piece of silver, a ghost in the making. Silas thought he had sold his problem. He didn't realize he had just funded the very revolution that would one day come to tear the crown from his head. The forest closed in around us, dark and hungry. And for the first time, I felt the shift of the wild. I wasn't going to a home. I was going to a war. If you're still holding your breath after that betrayal, you're in the right place. Welcome to the channel. We tell the stories of the forgotten, the fierce, and the ones who refuse to stay down. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our pack. We're building a community of survivors who know that being discarded is just the beginning of being dangerous. Smash the like button if you're ready to see Silas's biggest mistake turn into his worst nightmare. Let's head into the dirt. Let's enter Chapter 1. Chapter 1. 10 years is a long time to live in the dirt. By the time I was 10, I didn't know what a bed felt like, and the taste of cooked meat was a luxury reserved for the days we managed to raid a merchant caravan. I lived in the pit, a jagged, sunken limestone quarry on the edge of the Deadlands that served as a sanctuary for the world's filth. Rogues, exiles, and those too broken for pack life crawled here to die. But I didn't come here to die. I came here to hunt. "Move it, Scraps! If you're not fast enough to catch the mountain rats, you're not fast enough to eat." The voice belonged to Ratface, a mangy, half-shifted rogue who ran the scavenging pits. He swung a rusted iron chain toward my head, but I didn't flinch. I didn't even look up from the carcass I was skinning. I just tilted my head an inch to the left, letting the lynx whistle past my ear. I wasn't the soft, swaddled princess Silas had sold for silver. I was a wire-thin, dirt-streaked shadow. My hair was a matted nest of dark tangles, and my skin was a map of scars, souvenirs from the briars, the cold, and the other orphans who thought they could take what was mine. "I finished the skinning, Ratface," I said, my voice raspy from the dust of the quarry. "Where's my cut?" "Your cut?" He spat a glob of yellow phlegm into the dust near my bare feet. "The Alpha's daughter thinks she gets a cut? Your lucky Bram hasn't sold you to the pits in the south yet. Get back to the refuse piles. There's a shipment of spoiled grain coming in from the Bloodstone border. If you find any weevils, they're your protein for the night." I gripped the flint knife in my hand until my knuckles turned white. He called me Alpha's daughter as a slur. Here, my lineage wasn't a crown, it was a target. Every rogue in the pit knew I came from high blood, and every one of them wanted to see that blood in the mud. They hated the great packs, and since they couldn't reach Silas, they took it out on me. I walked away, my feet silent on the jagged rocks. I didn't head to the grain piles. I headed to the black ledge, the highest point of the quarry where the wind actually smelled like the world outside. I sat on the edge, looking toward the horizon where the distant, snow-capped peaks of the Bloodstone territory sat like a taunt. I could feel the pull of the moon, even during the day. It was a low, constant thrum in my marrow that told me I was different. While the other kids shifted into scrawny, mangy wolves at age 7, I remained human, shiftless. That's what they whispered when Bram wasn't looking, a high-blood reject with no wolf. They thought I was empty. They didn't realize that I was just waiting. In the pit, survival isn't about how big your claws are. It's about how long you can hold your breath in the dark. I had learned to read the scent of the wind, to track a lizard by the sound of its scales on stone, and to hide my heartbeat so well that even the elders thought I was a ghost. I reached into my tattered tunic and pulled out a single, tarnished silver coin I had stolen from Bram's stash years ago. I flipped it in the air, watching it catch the dim light of the quarry. "One day," I whispered to the wind, "I'm going to buy back every second of my life, and I'm going to pay for it in Bloodstone gold." Suddenly, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. A scent hit me, bitter, sharp, and predatory. It wasn't the smell of a rogue. It was the smell of a sentinel. The great packs were at the border, and for the first time in 10 years, they weren't just passing by. The scent of the sentinels was like a match struck in a dark room. It was too clean, too arrogant. It smelled of cedar oil and iron polish, the smell of wolves who had never slept in their own filth. 3 of them. I could hear the heavy thud of their boots on the limestone above the ledge. They were Bloodstone scouts, patrolling the dead zone to ensure no rogues were creeping toward their precious border. "This place stinks," one of them drawled. I recognized the crest on his leather pauldron. It was the twin wolf sigil of my father's elite guard. Why the Alpha has us patrolling a quarry full of scavengers is beyond me. We should just firebomb the hole and be done with it. "Orders are orders," another replied. "He's paranoid. Ever since the trade 10 years ago, he's been looking over his shoulder." My heart hammered against my ribs, but it wasn't fear. It was a cold, buzzing electricity. I crouched low, pressing my body into the gray dust of the rock until I was invisible. One of the scouts stepped away from the others, walking toward the edge of the ledge to relieve himself. He was barely 5 feet away from where I lay, hidden in the crevice. He was a man-wolf, half-shifted, his face elongated, and his eyes a glowing, smug amber. He didn't see the scraps of the pit. He didn't see the daughter of his king. I didn't think. I didn't plan. My body moved on a frequency I didn't know I possessed. I lunged. I didn't shift into a wolf, not yet. But as I leaped, my bones didn't just move. They snapped into place with a sound like a whip crack. My fingernails didn't grow, but they sharpened into jagged points. A low, guttural vibration started in the base of my spine and ripped through my throat. I slammed into the scout's back, my flint knife finding the narrow gap in his armor at the base of his neck. Ugh! He didn't even have time to scream. We tumbled over the ledge, falling 10 feet into the soft silt of the quarry floor. I landed on top of him, my weight driving the flint blade deep. He thrashed, his amber eyes wide with the shock of being brought down by a human child. "What was that?" the other two shouted from above, peering over the edge. The scout beneath me clawed at my face, his claws drawing blood across my cheek. The sting triggered something primal. My vision tunneled until all I saw was the red pulse of the vein in his neck. I didn't use the knife for the final blow. I opened my mouth, and for a split second, my teeth weren't human. They were long, serrated, and dripping with a silver saliva that burned. I buried them in his throat. The taste of his blood was like lightning. It wasn't just salt and iron. It was power. The moment I tasted the bloodstone lineage in him, my own wolf, the one they said didn't exist, roared to life. I didn't fully shift. I couldn't. I was a monstrosity of half-formed fur, elongated limbs, and human skin. But I was fast. The other two sentinels scrambled down the rocks, their swords drawn. "It's a feral! Kill it!" I didn't wait for them. I blurred. I moved through the shadows of the limestone pillars like a streak of soot. I appeared behind the second scout before he could even raise his blade. I didn't stab him. I used the raw, violent strength in my legs to kick him into a jagged pile of obsidian shards. The third scout stopped. He looked at his fallen comrades, then at me. I was standing over the first body, my face covered in blood, my eyes glowing a feral, unrefined silver that didn't match the pure gold of his kind. "You," he whispered, his sword trembling. "Those eyes. You're the alphas." I didn't let him finish. I lunged again, a scream of 10 years of discarded rage tearing from my lungs. I didn't kill him with a clean strike. I tore the sword from his hand and drove him into the mud, pinning him down with a strength that felt like it came from the earth itself. "Tell Silas," I hissed, my voice a mix of a girl's rasp and a wolf's growl. "Tell him the silver he got from me wasn't enough to pay for his life." I let him run. I watched him stumble away, terrified, leaving his brothers' bodies in the dirt. The adrenaline began to fade, and my body collapsed back into its human shape, every muscle screaming in agony. I looked down at my hands. They were stained crimson. I wasn't the girl who fought for scraps anymore. I was a killer, and I liked it. Bram appeared from the shadows of the quarry, his eyes wide as he looked at the dead sentinels. He didn't scold me. He didn't punish me. He walked over and picked up the discarded bloodstone sword, handing it to me. "The girl died today," Bram said, his voice unusually soft. "The Conqueror just took her first breath. Hide the bodies. We have work to do." Chapter 2. 3 years had passed since I tasted sentinel blood, and the pit was no longer big enough to hold the fire in my veins. At 13, I was a legend among the lowlifes, the feral child who killed 3 scouts with a rock and a prayer. But being a wild animal only gets you so far. To take a throne, you need to be a soldier. I found him in the gut, the deepest, darkest tavern in the quarry, where the air was 90% cheap ale and 10% regret. He was a mountain of a man, even hunched over a cracked wooden mug. His hair was the color of wood ash, and a jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, cutting through an eye that had long since gone blind. Thorn. He had once been the High General of the Ironclaw Pack, the man who designed the defensive grids for the entire Western Territory. Then he had refused an order to slaughter a village of Omegas. They stripped him of his rank, burned his family home, and threw him into the Deadlands to rot. "You're staring, Scraps," Thorn rumbled, his voice sounding like two boulders grinding together. He didn't even look up from his drink. "If you're here to rob me, I've got nothing but a dull knife and a bad liver. If you're here to kill me, get in line." "I'm here for you to teach me," I said, stepping into the light of the flickering tallow candle. Thorn finally looked up. His one good eye, a piercing slate gray, swept over me. He took in my ragged clothes, the bloodstone sword strapped to my back with hemp rope, and the cold predator's stillness in my posture. "I don't train pups," he spat. "Especially not high-blood runaways who think a bit of dirt on their face makes them rogues." "I'm not a runaway," I hissed, leaning over the table until our faces were inches apart. "I was traded, sold like a sack of grain by Alpha Silas, and I don't want to be a noble wolf. I want to be the thing that keeps them awake at night." Thorn paused, his mug halfway to his lips. The mention of Silas made his jaw tighten. "You're the daughter? The one from the silver trade?" "I'm the one who survived it," I replied. Thorn stood up. He was a head taller than any man in the pit, his shoulders wide enough to block out the tavern light. He walked toward the back exit, toward the training grounds, a desolate stretch of jagged rock and thorns. "The problem with you high-bloods," Thorn said as we stepped into the freezing night air, "is that you're obsessed with the pure shift. You wait for the perfect bone snap, the perfect fur growth. You want to be beautiful beasts." He turned suddenly, his hand a blur. Before I could blink, he had me pinned against a rock, his forearm across my throat. I struggled, my wolf instinct screaming to lash out, but his grip was like iron. "Shift for me," he commanded. "Now!" I tried. I reached for the power in my gut, but it came out wrong, as it always did. My bones groaned, my skin stretched, and a patch of gray fur sprouted on my shoulder, but the transition stalled. It was agonizing, a broken shift that left me half human, half monstrosity. "See?" Thorn let go, his eyes narrowing. "The council would call that a deformity. They'd call you shiftless or broken. But look at your hands, girl." I looked down. Because the shift hadn't completed, I still had human thumbs, but they were tipped with 3-inch obsidian-hard claws. I had the speed of a wolf, but the upright reach of a human. "A noble wolf has to drop to 4 legs to be dangerous," Thorn whispered, a dark glint in his eye. In that moment, they are vulnerable. They can't hold a sword. They can't climb a wall. But you? You are a hybrid. You can use a blade and a fang at the same time. You don't have a broken shift. You have a weaponized one. He picked up a heavy wooden spar and tossed it to me. "For the next 3 years, we aren't going to fix your shift," Thorn said, drawing his own practice blade. "We're going to perfect it. I'm going to teach you the rogue's gambit. We aren't going to fight like wolves. We're going to fight like ghosts." I gripped the spar, the weight of it feeling like a promise. I looked toward the mountains, toward the palace that thought I was a mistake. "When do we start?" I asked. "We just did," Thorn said, and then he lunged. By 16, I was no longer a ghost story whispered around tallow candles. I was the reason the candles stayed lit and the doors stayed barred. The pit had changed. It was no longer a chaotic sinkhole of desperate scavengers. Under Thorn's training and my own relentless hunger, it had become a stronghold. We called ourselves the Unbound. We didn't wear silk or gold. We wore cured leather, bone charcoal war paint, and the scars of 1,000 brawls. I stood on the black ledge, looking down into the quarry. I was taller now, my body a lean cord of whipcord muscle and survival. My hair was braided back with silver wire, the same wire I had pulled from the throats of the men who tried to sell me. The Scorpion gang has moved into the south tunnel, Thorn rumbled behind me. He looked older, his good eye weary but sharp. They're taxing the Omegas for water. They think because they have a few pure-blood rejects in their ranks, they own the quarry. They don't own the dirt they walk on, I said, my voice cold, devoid of the raspy desperation of my childhood. I looked at my team. There was Kale, a boy who could melt into the shadows of a cave wall, Mina, a tracker who could smell fear from a mile away, and 4 others who had been discarded by the noble packs for being too small, too loud, or too female. Tonight we take the south tunnel, I commanded. No survivors for the Scorpions. If they want to play alpha, they can do it in the dirt. We didn't march into the south tunnel with drums or torches. We slipped in. The Scorpion leader was a bloated, overconfident wolf named Vane. He sat on a throne of rusted scrap metal, laughing as his thugs harassed a group of elderly scavengers. He didn't hear the sound of the wind shifting. He didn't see the shadow detach itself from the ceiling. I dropped. I didn't shift fully. I didn't need to. As I fell, I triggered the hybrid state Thorn had perfected. My legs lengthened, my claws extended, and my silver eyes ignited with a predatory fire. I landed on Vane's shoulders, my knees locking around his neck. Before he could even growl, I drove my obsidian-tipped fingers into his collarbones. "The ghost!" one of his thugs screamed, dropping his weapon. "The ghost doesn't like competition," I hissed into Vane's ear. He tried to shift, his body expanding in an attempt to crush me, but the rogue's gambit was designed for this. I didn't fight his strength. I used it. As he grew, I shifted my weight, using the momentum of his own expansion to snap his radius. The tunnel erupted into a blur of silver and blood. My unbound team moved like a single organism. Kyle took out the lookouts. Mina silenced the reinforcements. We didn't fight like a pack. We fought like a nightmare. I stood in the center of the carnage, my broken shift flickering under my skin. I held Vane by the throat, his massive wolf form whimpering as my human-looking hand squeezed with the strength of a titan. "Who do you serve?" I asked. "Nobody," he wheezed. We're rogues." "Wrong," I said, my claws sinking deeper. "You're cowards. A rogue is someone who refused to be a slave. You just want to be a master. There are no masters in the pit anymore, only me." I tossed him aside and looked at the terrified scavengers. I didn't ask them to bow. I didn't ask for their silver. "From tonight, the water is free," I announced. "If anyone asks who gave it to you, tell them it was the daughter Silas didn't want. Tell them the ghost is done hiding." As we walked out of the tunnel, the whispers followed us. The reputation was solidified. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a warlord in the making. Thorn caught my eye and nodded. He knew what I was thinking. The pit was ours. The Deadlands were following. And soon, the Bloodstone border wouldn't be a boundary. It would be a front line. "You're ready," Thorn whispered. "No," I replied, looking toward the mountains. "I'm hungry." Chapter 3. The invitation didn't come to me on a silk pillow. It came in the pocket of a dead courier who had wandered too far into the Deadlands, thinking his royal messenger badge would protect him from the hunger of the unbound. I sat in the center of my war room, a cavernous hall deep within the pit, illuminated by the low glow of bioluminescent moss and stolen torches. I smoothed out the crumpled parchment on the stone table. By order of Alpha Silas of the Bloodstone Pack, the Centennial Trials. A week of combat and cunning to determine the mate for the true heir, Prince Valen. All noble houses and high blood lineages are summoned. Let the strongest blood prevail. "True heir," I whispered, the words tasting like copper. Valen. I remembered him, my younger brother. The prophesied son who had been born a year after I was sold. The boy who had slept in the furs I should have owned, who had been fed the strength of the pack while I was eating rats in the mud. "It's a trap for the ego," Thorn said, leaning against the cave wall, his one good eye scanning the document. "Silas is looking to solidify his alliances. He wants a powerful female from a northern pack to breed a new generation of soldiers. You go there, and you're walking into the lion's den, girl." "I'm not a girl anymore, Thorn," I said, standing up. I was taller now, my presence filling the room with a cold, predatory weight. "And I'm not going there to be a bride." "Then why go?" Mina asked from the shadows. "We have everything we need here. The pit is thriving." "Because Silas needs to see what his silver bought him," I replied. "He thinks he traded a liability for a victory. I want him to watch as the defect he discarded destroys his true heir in front of the entire council. I want to take his pride before I take his head." I looked at the bloodstone sword resting on the table, the one I had taken from the scout 3 years ago. It was polished now, its edge sharpened to a molecular point. "I can't go as myself," I mused. "The crescent birthmark on my shoulder is too distinct, and the moment I shift, Silas might recognize the broken cadence of my bones." "Then don't be a wolf," Thorn suggested, a grim smile touching his scarred face. "Be a nightmare. Wear the mask of the viper." For the next week, we prepared. We didn't gather silk gowns or perfumes. We crafted a suit of combat leathers made from the hide of a shadow stalker, a beast that absorbs light. I forged a mask of blackened steel, shaped into the visage of a hooded serpent, designed to distort my voice into a low, metallic hiss. I wouldn't be entering as a daughter. I would be entering as a mercenary, a rogue element, a viper from the nameless wastes. "The rules of the trial say any high blood lineage can enter," I said, my fingers tracing the silver wire in my braids. "Technically, I am the highest blood in that valley. My claim is older than Valen's. My right is absolute." "They'll kill you if they find out who you are," Kyle warned. "They have to catch me first," I replied. I looked at my reflection in a pool of dark water at the back of the cave. The girl who was sold for 20,000 silver marks was gone. In her place stood a woman who had been forged in the pit and tempered in the wild. "Thorn, gather 20 of our best. We don't enter through the front gates. We camp in the gray fells overlooking the arena. When the viper enters the pit, I want the unbound watching from the heights." I picked up the mask and pressed it to my face. The cold steel felt like a homecoming. "Let's go home, Thorn," I said, my voice muffled and strange behind the metal. "It's time to show my father that some debts can't be paid in silver." The Bloodstone Arena was a massive bowl of white marble and jagged obsidian, built into the side of a mountain. Thousands of wolves sat in the stands, a sea of gold, white, and gray fur. At the highest point sat the royal box, and there he was, Alpha Silas. He looked exactly as I remembered, only grayer, his scent even more pungent with the smell of unearned authority. Beside him sat a woman who looked like a ghost, my mother. She looked hollow, her eyes fixed on the sand below, as if she were searching for something she lost a long time ago. "Next contestant," the herald's voice boomed, "the mercenary known only as Viper, representing the nameless wastes." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. A mercenary? From the Deadlands? The noble warriors of the Seven Peaks sneered. To them, I was a joke, a scavenger playing at war. I stepped into the center of the arena. My black leather armor drank the sunlight, making me look like a hole in reality. My steel serpent mask glinted, cold and expressionless. "First match," the herald cried. "Viper versus Commander Grak of the Iron Claw." Grak was a mountain of muscle. He shifted instantly, his transformation a perfect display of golden fur and snapping bone. He roared, a sound designed to make Omegas tremble. I didn't even draw my sword. Grak lunged, a predictable heavy strike aimed at my head. I didn't dodge. I slipped. Using the rogue's gambit, I dropped beneath his center of gravity. My broken shift sparked just for a second, giving my legs the explosive power of a spring. I drove my palm into his solar plexus, my obsidian claws snagging his thick fur. Grak gasped, his lungs collapsing. Before he could recover, I spun, my heel catching him in the jaw with the force of a falling boulder. The mighty commander hit the sand with a wet thud, unconscious before his snout even touched the ground. The laughter in the stands died instantly. One by one, they came. The elite sentinels, the golden sons of the 7 peaks. I dismantled them all. I didn't fight like a wolf. I fought like a storm. I used their weight against them, tripped them with their own tails, and struck pressure points they didn't even know they had. Finally, the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the arena. "The final match!" Silas stood, his voice booming with a forced pride. "The Viper versus the pride of the Bloodstone. My son, Prince Valen." The crowd erupted. Valen stepped into the circle. He was beautiful, if you like the smell of arrogance. His golden fur was groomed to a shine, and his eyes were a piercing blue, full of the belief that he was invincible. "You've had a good run, mercenary," Valen sneered, his voice high and entitled. "But this is where the dirt meets the gold. I am the prophesied son. You are just a shadow." "Prophecies are written by men," I hissed behind my mask, the metallic distortion making him flinch. "I was written by the cold." Valen shifted. It was the most arrogant shift I'd ever seen, slow, theatrical, meant to show off every rippling muscle. He became a massive golden wolf, nearly the size of a grizzly. He lunged with the speed of a thunderbolt. But I was the lightning. I triggered the hybrid shift. My bones cracked, my stature grew, and my silver glass claws extended. We collided in the center of the pit. Valen tried to use Alpha Command, a psychic roar meant to force me to my knees. "Submit!" his mind screamed. But I had no alpha. I was unbound. I caught his massive jaws with my bare hands, the strength of the pit surging through my arms. Valen's eyes went wide with terror. How could a human hold back a prince? "You were fed on silk, Valen," I growled, my voice echoing in his mind. "I was fed on the silver our father took from my life." I twisted. With a sickening crack, I dislocated his shoulder. Valen howled in agony, not the howl of a warrior, but the whimper of a beaten dog. I kicked his legs out from under him and pinned him to the sand, my flint knife held against his throat. The entire arena went silent. You could hear the wind whistling through the obsidian peaks. I looked up at the royal box. Silas was leaning over the railing, his face pale, his hands trembling. He recognized the technique. He recognized the broken shift. "Who are you?" Silas whispered, his voice carrying in the dead silence. I reached up and unlatched the steel mask. I let it fall into the bloody sand. I shook out my dark, silver-braided hair and stared straight into my father's eyes. "Look at me, Alpha," I shouted, my voice ringing with 18 years of stored-up vengeance. "Does the silver still feel heavy in your pockets?" The Luna, my mother, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Fenris?" "I am the Viper," I said, my foot pressing harder into Valen's chest. "I am the ghost of the pit, and I am the firstborn heir of the Bloodstone." Silas didn't apologize. He didn't cry, his face contorted into a mask of pure murderous rage. "Guards!" he screamed. "Treason! Execute the defect!" Chapter 4. The word treason echoed off the marble walls like a death knell. At Silas's command, 30 elite sentinels leaped from the stands, their silver-tipped spears leveled at my heart. Valen, whimpering beneath my boot, scrambled away in the dirt, his golden fur stained with the filth of the arena floor. He wasn't a prince anymore. He was a coward looking for a hole to hide in. "Killer!" Silas roared, his face a purple mask of fury. "Burn the defect where she stands." I stood alone in the center of that white circle, the sun setting behind me, casting a shadow so long it reached the throne. I didn't draw my sword. I didn't run. I simply reached into my belt and pulled out a small, hollowed-out bird bone. I blew into it. It didn't make a sound, at least not one a human ear could hear. But to the outcasts, the broken and the rogues hidden in the jagged cliffs above. It was the sound of the world ending. Thum. The first explosion rocked the North Stadium wall. Not magic, but the raw, crude black powder we'd perfected in the pit. Dust and stone rained down on the noble guests, turning their fine silks to gray rags. "What is this?" Silas screamed, clutching the railing. Then they came. They didn't descend like a royal army. They descended like a nightmare. My unbound warriors leaped from the 500-foot cliffs, using grappling hooks and shadow cloaks to vanish and reappear in the midst of the crowd. "For the ghost!" Kyle's voice echoed through the chaos as he landed on the back of a sentinel, his twin daggers finding the gaps in the man's armor. "For the discarded!" Mina roared, leading a pack of rogue trackers through the royal box, sending the noble ladies screaming into the tunnels. The arena was no longer a place of sport. It was a slaughterhouse. My people, the ones Silas called trash, were dismantling his elite guard with the brutal efficiency of the wild. We didn't fight with honor. We fought to win. We used sand in the eyes, hidden blades in the boots, and the raw, terrifying power of the hybrid shift. I saw Thorn. The old general dropped into the pit beside me, his massive claymore cleaving a path through the sentinels. He stood back to back with me, his good eye gleaming with the joy of a man who had waited 10 years for this specific bloodbath. "You took your sweet time, girl," Thorn grunted, parrying a silver spear. "I wanted to see the look on his face first," I replied, my eyes fixed on Silas. The Alpha was trying to reach the tunnels, his personal guard forming a wall of shields around him. He looked down and saw me, covered in the blood of his men, my silver eyes glowing with a lunar fire that shouldn't exist in a defect. "You're not a wolf," Silas shrieked, his voice cracking with terror. "You're a monster." "You're half right, father," I shouted over the sounds of clashing steel and dying screams. "I'm the monster you paid for. 20,000 marks. Remember, it was a bargain." I lunged. I didn't go for the guards. I went for the throne. I leaped over the shield wall, my claws digging into the stone as I scaled the royal box. Silas drew his golden broadsword, but his hands were shaking. He had spent 10 years sitting on a chair, while I spent 10 years learning how to kill kings. I landed on the railing, inches from his face. "Where's your prophecy now, Silas?" I hissed. Before I could strike, a heavy iron grate slammed down between us. The escape gate. Silas scrambled backward into the dark mountain tunnels, his cowards trailing behind him. I turned back to the arena. The unbound had taken the floor. The bloodstone flag was being torn down and replaced with a ragged piece of black leather. We had won the battle, but the war had just begun. Silas was fleeing to his mountain fortress, and he was taking my mother with him. "Let him run," I said to Thorn as he climbed up to join me. "He thinks those tunnels are a sanctuary. He's forgotten that I've spent my entire life in the dark. To him, the caves are a prison. To me, they're home." The iron grate was still vibrating from the force of Silas's retreat. Beyond it lay the labyrinth of the ancestors, a network of ancient, twisting tunnels that honeycombed the Bloodstone Mountain. Silas had spent his life treating these caves as a tomb for his predecessors. I had spent mine treating caves like a cradle. "He's running for the inner sanctum," Thorn growled, wiping blood from his brow. "If he reaches the Sun Gate, he can lock the entire mountain from the outside and starve us out while he escapes through the high peaks." "He won't reach it," I said, my voice dropping into that low, predatory hum. "Kyle, Mina, take the flanks. The rest of the unbound, stay behind me. If you see a tripwire, don't touch it. Silas is a coward, and cowards love a hidden sting." We moved into the dark. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur and old fear. Unlike the pit, which was raw and open, these tunnels were narrow, designed to make anyone who wasn't a pureblood feel small. But as we pushed deeper, the silence became wrong. Silas's guards weren't fighting back. We found their discarded shields and broken spears, but no bodies. "Stop," I whispered, raising my hand. We were in the Hall of Echoes, a massive circular chamber where the stone was so thin you could hear the heartbeat of the mountain. In the center of the room sat a single golden chest, the kind used to hold the pack's silver reserves. "A trap?" Cale whispered, his daggers out. "It's a lure," I replied. I looked up. The ceiling wasn't just stone. It was reinforced with silver nitrate canisters, the kind used to clear out feral dens. If those canisters ruptured, they wouldn't just kill us. They would liquefy the lungs of every shifter in the room. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the hidden vents in the walls. "Silas." "You always were a scavenger, Fenris," his voice echoed, distorted and mocking. "Looking for scraps, looking for the silver I stole from you. Well, here it is, all of it." Click. The sound of a mechanical trigger resonated through the floor. "The chest is the weight sensor," Thorn roared. "The floor is dropping." The ground beneath us groaned and tilted. At the same time, the silver nitrate canisters began to hiss. A pale, shimmering mist started to descend from the ceiling. One breath of that would burn our wolf spirits to ash. "The exit is sealing," Mina cried, pointing toward the heavy stone door that was sliding shut. "Everyone, get to the center," I commanded. "The center? That's where the trap is," Thorn shouted. "Trust me," I screamed, my silver eyes flaring bright enough to pierce the mist. I didn't try to stop the floor from falling. I stepped onto the golden chest. I triggered my hybrid shift, but instead of focusing the energy into my claws, I drove it into the soles of my feet. I tapped into the void weight I'd learned in the deepest trenches of the pit, the ability to make my body as heavy as the stone itself. I slammed my heels down. The weight sensor didn't just trigger, it shattered. The entire floor mechanism jammed, the tilting stone slabs locking into place with a violent jolt. "Cale, the vents!" I pointed upward. Cale leaped, using the momentum of the jolt to reach the ceiling. He stuffed his leather cloak into the primary nitrate vent, buying us seconds. "We're not escaping through the door," I said, looking at the cracks I'd just made in the floor. "Silas thinks he can bury us? Fine. We're going to show him what happens when you let the dark into your foundation." I gripped the edges of the shattered sensor pit. My muscles bulged, my human skin tearing to reveal the jagged, obsidian-like hide of my broken wolf. With a roar that shook the mountain to its roots, I ripped the floor open. Below us wasn't a tomb. It was the understream, the hidden river that fed the valley. "Jump," I ordered. One by one, the unbound plunged into the icy subterranean water. I was the last to go. I looked up at the vents, knowing Silas was listening. "You should have kept the silver, Silas," I whispered into the dark, "because now I'm coming for the gold." I let go. The freezing water swallowed me, carrying us away from the gas and the collapsing hall. We weren't dead. We were in the mountain's veins now, and every vein leads to the heart. Chapter 5. The understream was a cold, merciless tunnel of obsidian water, but it spat us out exactly where the bloodstone elite never bothered to look, the drainage grates beneath the great kitchens. I hauled myself out of the freezing slush, my lungs burning, my broken wolf hide steaming in the sudden warmth of the palace depths. Thorn, Cale, and the others emerged behind me, looking like drowned rats, but drowned rats with bared fangs. The air here didn't smell like sulfur or damp stone. It smelled of roasting venison, expensive spices, and the sweat of 100 omegas. "Where are we?" Kyle whispered, wiping silt from his daggers. "The belly of the beast," I replied, peering through the iron slats of the floor grate. Above us, the palace was in a state of controlled panic. We could hear the heavy boots of sentinels patrolling the corridors, but here, in the steam-filled kitchens, the only sound was the frantic clatter of copper pans and the hushed, terrified whispers of the servants. I pushed the grate open and climbed into the larder. A young Omega girl, no older than 14, was stacking crates of wine. She saw me, a blood-stained, half-shifted nightmare rising from the floor, and her eyes went wide. She opened her mouth to scream. I was across the room in a blur, my hand gently but firmly covering her mouth. "Don't," I whispered, my silver eyes softening just enough to show her the girl behind the ghost. "I'm not here for you. I'm the one Silas sold for silver. Do you know who I am?" The girl's eyes darted to the crescent birthmark on my shoulder, now visible through my shredded leathers. Her trembling stopped. She didn't see a monster. She saw the legend the servants had been whispering about for 10 years. The discarded daughter," she breathed as I lowered my hand. "We heard the explosions in the arena. They said you were dead." "The Deadlands don't take their own so easily," I said. I looked around the kitchen. Dozens of Omegas, cooks, and cleaners were frozen in place, watching us. "Silas is barricaded in the inner sanctum, isn't he? He's using you as a shield, hoping we'll have to cut through you to get to him." A head cook, an old man with a scarred face and a limp, stepped forward. "He's doubled the guard at every golden door. He says the ferals are coming to eat us all." "I don't eat my own kind," I said, my voice rising so every person in the room could hear me. "Silas calls you Omegas. He calls you useless. He uses you to cook his meals and wash his blood from the floors, and then he forgets you exist. But tonight, the invisible people are going to become the ones who hold the keys." I reached into my belt and pulled out a handful of flint knives and stolen sentinel daggers, laying them on the central prep table. "I'm not asking you to die for me," I said. "I'm asking you to stop working for him. Open the side passages, jam the locks on the sentinel barracks, give my warriors the maps to the secret stairs. Tonight, we don't just take a throne. We end the idea that anyone is discarded." The old cook looked at the knives, then at his own trembling hands. He picked up a meat cleaver, his eyes burning with a decade of suppressed rage. "He took my son for a war that didn't matter," the cook whispered. "And he told me I was lucky to still have a job." One by one, the servants stepped forward. The invisible army began to move. Within minutes, the palace was working against itself. The soup meant for the elite guard was drugged with sleeping herbs from the garden. The heavy oak doors to the barracks were barred from the outside by the very men who cleaned the hinges. "They're ready," Thorne said, watching the Omegas slip into the shadows of the servant tunnels. "The purebloods are about to find out that a palace is just a cage if the people inside won't let you out." "Let's move," I said, gripping my sword. "Silas is waiting for a frontal assault. He's not expecting his own house to swallow him whole." The inner sanctum didn't feel like a room. It felt like a tomb of gold. The doors, once guarded by 30 men, now stood open, their locks jammed from the inside by the very servants who had polished the brass for years. I stepped into the hall, my boots clicking on the marble. The smell was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't the cedar oil of the palace anymore. It was the smell of scorched fur, chemicals, and a sick, sweet rot. Silas sat on his throne, his crown lopsided, his eyes wild. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the figure standing in the center of the room. "I told you, Fenris," Silas rasped, his voice trembling with a manic glee. "I told you I would have my prophesied son. If the moon wouldn't give him to me, I would make him myself." "Valen," I whispered. The thing in the center of the room turned. It was no longer the golden-haired boy I had beaten in the arena. Valen had been bloated to twice his original size. His skin was translucent, stretched thin over muscles that pulsed with a sickening artificial violet light. Veins like black snakes writhed under his chest, and his eyes. They weren't blue or gold anymore. They were flat, oily voids. "The Titan's serum!" Thorne growled from behind me, his hand tightening on his claymore. "It's a forbidden alchemical rot. It grants the strength of 100 alphas, but it burns the soul to ash. Silas, you've murdered your own son." "I've perfected him," Silas screamed. "He is the bloodstone. He is the wall that your trash will never climb. Valen, kill the defect. Kill the girl who stole your glory." Valen let out a sound that wasn't a roar or a howl. It was a mechanical, guttural screech. He moved with a speed that defied his massive size. 1 second he was 10 feet away. The next, his fist, larger than my head, was slamming into my chest. I flew backward, my body crashing through a marble pillar. The world went white. I felt my ribs crack, the internal pressure of the hybrid shift, the only thing keeping my organs from liquefying. Fenris! Thorn lunged at Valen, but the monster simply swiped a hand, sending the legendary general skidding across the floor like a rag doll. I spat blood and forced myself up. My broken wolf was screaming inside me. It didn't want to fight a brother. It wanted to fight a monster. Valen, stop! I shouted, dodging a strike that shattered the throne's dais. He's killing you. The serum is eating your heart. Valen didn't hear me. There was nothing left of the boy who had whimpered in the sand. He was a puppet of meat and rage. He lunged again, his claws, now glowing with that violet rot, aiming for my throat. I realized then that Silas hadn't just discarded me. He had discarded Valen, too. He didn't love his son. He loved the idea of a son. We were both just tools to him. The realization hit me with more force than Valen's fist. The coldness I had carried since the basket at the border finally crystallized. I didn't try to outmuscle him. I used the rogue's gambit. As Valen lunged, I dropped. I didn't shift into a beast. I collapsed my own density. I became a shadow at his feet. As he passed over me, I reached up and grabbed the black, pulsing vein at the base of his neck. I didn't use a knife. I used my hybrid claws to channel the raw, unrefined lunar energy of the unbound, the broken power that Silas hated so much. I injected my own survival, my own coldness, into his artificial heat. The two energies collided. The violet light in Valen's veins turned a blinding, pure silver. He stiffened, his body vibrating with the conflict of the two powers. For a fleeting second, the flat blackness in his eyes cleared. He looked at me, not as a monster, but as a brother. Fenris, he choked out. Then he exploded, not in blood but in a shockwave of silver light that blew the windows of the sanctum outward. When the dust settled, Valen lay on the floor. He was human again, but he was gray, the serum having taken everything he had left. He was alive, but he would never shift again. He was as broken as I was supposed to be. I stood over him, my chest heaving, then looked up at the throne. Silas was trying to crawl away, his crown having fallen into the filth. He looked at me, and for the first time in 18 years, he didn't see a daughter, a defect, or a mercenary. He saw his end. "Get up, Silas," I said, my voice as cold as the night he sold me. "The trade is over. It's time to settle the debt." Chapter 6. Silas didn't die like a king. He died like a merchant who had finally run out of credit. He was backed against the shattered remains of his golden throne, his fingers clawing at the marble. I didn't give him a speech. I didn't give him the satisfaction of hearing me cry. I simply stepped forward, the bloodstone sword, the one I had carried from the dirt of the pit to the heart of the palace, humming in my hand. "Wait!" he shrieked, his voice thin and pathetic. "I can give you the northern mines. I can give you the secret accounts in the Iron City. You're my blood, Fenris. We can rule together." "You sold my blood for silver, Silas," I said, "and I don't rule with ghosts." I swung. The blade was a blur of silver light. Silas's head hit the floor with a heavy, hollow thud, his crown rolling away into the shadows. The great Alpha was gone. The prophecy was dead. I stood in the silence of the inner sanctum, the blood of my father staining my boots. Thorn approached, his hand resting on my shoulder. "It's over, girl. The mountain is ours." "No," I said, my ears twitching as a low, rhythmic drumming began to vibrate through the stone floor. "It's just beginning." Suddenly, the doors to the balcony burst open. Kyle rushed in, his face pale. "Fenris, the Southern Watch, they've been overrun. But it's not the rogues, it's the Sunclaw pack." I walked to the balcony and looked down. The valley was no longer dark. Thousands of torches illuminated the forest floor, a disciplined golden army of armored wolves and horsemen. At their head was a man on a white stallion, his armor forged from sun gold, and his cape a roaring crimson, Alpha Jackson, the Sun King of the South. He raised his spear, and his voice boomed through a magically amplified roar that shook the very foundation of the palace. "Citizens of the Bloodstone," Jackson cried, "your Alpha has been murdered by a band of feral rogues. Your prince has been desecrated. I, Alpha Jackson, come as your protector. Under the Continental Treaty, I declare this coup illegal and the Bloodstone territory a ward of the Sunclaw. Lay down your arms or be purged with the scavengers." "Protector?" Mina spat, joining me on the balcony. "He's been waiting at the border for weeks. He let us do the dirty work of killing Silas so he could walk in and claim the prize." "He thinks I'm a feral distraction," I said, my silver eyes narrowing as I looked down at the Golden Army. "He thinks he's coming to rescue a pack that has already been won." I looked at my unbound warriors. They were exhausted, bloodied, and outnumbered 10 to 1. Then I looked at the Omegas and servants who were peeking out from the kitchen windows and servant doors, their eyes wide with the fear that their new freedom was about to be snuffed out by a new master. "Thorn," I said, my voice dropping into that terrifyingly calm register. "Gather the heads of the high houses who survived the arena and get me the silver trade pouch I took from the treasury." "What are you doing?" Thorn asked. "I'm going to go talk to a noble," I replied, "and show him exactly how much my life is worth." I didn't wait for the Sunclaw to breach the gates. I walked out of the palace, down the great staircase, and toward the main gates alone. I didn't wear a crown. I didn't wear a mask. I wore the blood of the Alpha and the scars of the pit. The gates groaned open, and I stepped out into the torchlight of the Sunclaw army. 1,000 spears leveled at my chest. Alpha Jackson rode forward, his golden eyes scanning me with a mix of pity and disgust. He was handsome in a way that felt artificial, too perfect, too clean. "Where is the girl they call the Ghost?" Jackson demanded, his voice echoing. "Tell your leader to surrender, and I may spare the lives of the Omegas." "I am the Ghost," I said, standing my ground as his stallion reared up. "And you're standing on my property, Jackson. You've got 10 minutes to turn this army around before I decide that Sunclaw gold looks better than Bloodstone silver." Jackson laughed, a rich, condescending sound. "You? A rogue girl? You're a thief who found a key, nothing more. I have the legal right to this land. You have nothing but a knife and a dream." "I have the Bloodstone lineage," I countered, "and I have the loyalty of the people you call scraps. But more importantly, I reached into the leather pouch and pulled out a handful of Silas's silver coins. I threw them at the feet of his horse. "I've already been sold once," I hissed. "I'm not for sale again. If you want this mountain, you'll have to take it from the monster Silas created." Jackson's smile faded. He saw the shift starting under my skin, not the clumsy golden shift of his soldiers, but the jagged, terrifying hybrid shift of a woman who had survived the end of the world. "Then you die with the rest of the filth," Jackson said, raising his spear. "Attack!" The air exploded. Jackson's sun guards charged, a wall of golden shields and shimmering spears. But they were used to fighting honorable wars on open plains. They weren't prepared for the unbound. From the battlements, my rogues rained down pots of pit fire, a sticky, burning naphtha that turned the golden armor into ovens. I didn't stay behind the gates. I moved like a blur of mercury through the front lines. My hybrid shift was at its peak. I was a whirlwind of silver claws and obsidian-edged steel. I wasn't just killing. I was harvesting. Every time a Sunclaw soldier fell, I moved to the next, my heart beating with the rhythmic fury of the Deadlands. "Get to the girl!" Jackson roared, leaping from his horse. He shifted mid-air. It was a magnificent sight, a massive, golden-maned wolf that seemed to radiate actual heat. He was a creature of pure light, the perfect antithesis to my shadow. He slammed into me, his sheer mass throwing us both into the muddy clearing away from the main melee. We tumbled, clawing and snarling, until we rolled into the center of a stone ritual circle at the base of the mountain. Jackson pinned me down, his massive paws crushing my shoulders into the dirt. His jaws were inches from my throat. "Yield, rogue!" His voice boomed in my mind. "I don't want to slaughter a female, but I will bury—" He stopped. Suddenly, the world went silent. The sounds of clashing swords and screams faded into a dull hum. A scent began to rise from the mud, the smell of rain on hot stone, of ozone and wild honey. It was a scent that had been buried in my DNA since birth, waiting for a key. Jackson's golden eyes widened. The murderous rage in them vanished, replaced by a shock so profound it made his entire body tremble. He shifted back to his human form right there in the mud, his hands shaking as they stayed pinned to my shoulders. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's impossible. You're a feral. You're the discarded." A heat began to bloom in my chest, a golden thread trying to lace itself around my heart. The mate bond. It was a pull so strong it felt like a physical hook in my ribs, dragging me toward him. "The moon goddess is a cruel bitch, isn't she, Jackson?" I spat, coughing up blood and staring him dead in the eye. "You're my mate," he breathed, his hand reaching out to touch the crescent mark on my shoulder. His voice was no longer that of a conqueror. It was the voice of a man who had just found his missing soul in a graveyard. "The bond. It's the strongest I've ever felt. I was sent here to claim this land, but I was really sent here to find you." He looked at the palace, then back at me, a frantic light in his eyes. "Fenris, stop this madness. This is a sign. If you're my mate, the war is over. I'll declare you my Luna. The Sunclaw and the Bloodstone will unite under my crown. You'll never have to sleep in the dirt again. You'll be the most powerful woman in the world." I looked at him, really looked at him. He was offering me everything the world told a female wolf to want: protection, status, and a noble name, and it made me want to vomit. I grabbed his wrist, the one with the gold-engraved bracer, and twisted it until I heard the bone groan. I surged upward, flipping our positions until I was the one pinning the Sun King to the mud. I drove my flint knife into the earth an inch from his ear. "You don't get it, do you?" I hissed, the silver in my eyes drowning out his gold. "You think the mate bond is a rescue mission? You think it's a way for you to take my mountain without firing another shot?" "It's destiny, Fenris," he gasped, the bond making it impossible for him to strike back at me. "You're my Luna." "I am no one's Luna," I growled. "I didn't survive the pit, I didn't kill my father, and I didn't lead an army of ghosts just to be the pretty half of your crown. You want a mate? Then you better learn to be a consort." I leaned in closer, my breath hot against his neck. "Because here is how this ends. You order your army to stand down. You acknowledge me as the sovereign alpha of the unbound territories. And if you ever try to claim me or my land again, I will snap that bond like the dry twig it is. I survived 18 years without a mate. I can survive an eternity without you." Jackson looked up at me, the Sun King humbled in the dirt. He saw the fire of 1,000 outcasts in my gaze. He realized that I wasn't the prize at the end of his war. I was the wall he would never climb. Slowly, painfully, Jackson bowed his head. It was the ultimate submission, an alpha bowing to his mate not out of love, but out of the realization of her absolute power. I yield," he whispered. "The Sunclaw stands down." I stood up, wiping the mud from my face. I didn't help him up. I turned toward the battlefield and let out a roar that signaled the end of the Bloodstone era. I wasn't a daughter, a sister, or a mate. I was a conqueror, and the world was finally quiet. The epilogue. They used to call this place the Bloodstone. Now, the maps simply refer to it as the Crucible. 5 years have passed since I stood in the mud and watched an alpha king bow to a girl from the pit. The mountain doesn't smell like rot or sulfur anymore. It smells of mountain air and the wood smoke of 1,000 new hearths. I sit upon the throne I carved myself, not from gold, but from the dark, indestructible basalt of the lower quarries. I don't wear a crown of jewels. I wear a simple band of silver, melted down from the very coins Silas used to sell me. It's cold against my skin, a constant reminder that I was bought once, and I can never be bought again. The hierarchy of the pure bloods has been dismantled. In my halls, an Omega sits at the strategy table next to a general. We don't measure worth by the purity of a shift, but by the depth of one's scars and the strength of their loyalty. The pit is no longer a prison. It's our greatest academy, where the youth learn that survival is the highest form of art. Thorn is my high counselor. He's older now, his hair completely white, but he walks the palace with a pride that no noble could ever strip away. Kale and Mina lead the Shadow Guard, ensuring that no noble pack ever dares to creep toward our borders again. And then there is Valen. My brother lives in the Western Wing. He will never shift again, and the Titan serum left him with a permanent tremor in his hands. But he found a different kind of strength. He spends his days teaching the young pups how to read and write, ensuring the next generation knows that a mind is a weapon even when the body fails. He doesn't look at me with envy anymore. He looks at me with a quiet, broken gratitude. As for Jackson, the Sun King comes to the border once a month. He brings gifts of grain, medicine, and steel. He still looks at me with that desperate golden pull of the mate bond in his eyes, but he stays on his side of the line. He learned the hard way that a mate isn't a trophy to be won. She's a soul to be respected. He isn't my master, and he isn't my savior. He is an ally who knows exactly what happens when the shadow meets the sun. I walk out onto the balcony, the same one where I once watched the Sunclaw army. Below me, the valley is alive. The invisible people are building a city that will outlast any prophecy. I reach into my pocket and feel the last silver coin. I don't keep it out of hate anymore. I keep it as a testament. The world will tell you that you are a defect. They will tell you that because you don't fit their mold, you are meant for the cellar. They will try to trade your worth for their own gain. Let them. Because when they throw you away, they are only putting you exactly where you need to be to find your real pack. They think they are discarding a liability, but they are actually planting a seed. I was the Alpha's discarded daughter. I was raised by rogues, and I was crowned by a fate that I grabbed with my own 2 hands. My name is Fenris, and the night no longer belongs to the monsters. It belongs to us.